Hello, my name is Debbie Boone, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, The Bend, where we explore how successful people navigated the path and emerged in a better place when life threw them an unexpected twist. It's inspired by one of my favorite sayings: the bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the curve. These conversations will hopefully help you and inspire you to embrace your personal bend and to flourish. I hope you enjoy it, and if you need help with your own personal navigation and you're in veterinary medicine, please feel free to reach out to me at Debbie Boone to Manage Vets Consulting. Enjoy the bend and be inspired by our wonderful guest. Welcome. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode of The Bend. I am your host, Debbie Boone, and today I have a non-veterinarian, which is kind of unique to me and not coming from the veterinary profession. But this is Michael Raphael. He is the CEO and founder of IndeVets. This is a veterinary staffing company, and their mission is to bring back balance, fulfillment, and joy to veterinary medicine by giving doctors the time they need to get their work-life balance, to regroup, to have a real vacation, and not worry about their practice falling apart while they're gone. IndeVets has actually been named one of Inc.'s 5,000 fastest growing private companies for 3 years and has been certified a great place to work. Raphael began his career as an investigative journalist. So this is making me sweat a little bit about doing an interview because I'm here with the pro. He even earned a Pulitzer Prize nomination for his reporting on racial profiling, which I would love to hear about. Got his MBA from Temple's Fox School and co-founded Community Veterinary Partners, where he saw firsthand our nationwide staffing shortage of veterinarians and the mental health crisis, and then made the idea for IndeVets be born. He is an advocate for animal welfare, helped Philadelphia achieve a no-kill city status through his work with the Philadelphia Animal Welfare Society. So, Michael, thank you for doing that work and helping those critters, and then helping the human critters in our world have a better life too.
Debbie, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, and we were just talking earlier before we started to record about how sometimes life throws you a lot of curveballs and bends in the road. And you started out as an investigative journalist. So I'm assuming that your MBA and your interest is in journalism. How did you get into journalism, and then how did you get into veterinary medicine from there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with journalism, newspapers in general. I literally used to sit outside the manufacturing plant where they printed all the newspapers here in Philadelphia, and I would watch them start the presses, and you could see there was a little space where the newspapers would kind of roll outside the building. You could see them running. I would drive down there and watch. I was just enamored by the whole profession and just fascinated by it. And in high school, I was a reporter, and then I was an editor for our newspaper, and went to Northwestern to study journalism, and ended up starting my career as a journalist. And I loved it. What I loved the most was researching and talking to people and understanding problems. I just have this fascination with getting to the core problem. What I didn't love nearly as much was the writing, even though that seems to be the core kind of job that you have to do. And I did cover a lot of interesting things, everything from sports to state government, and even racial profiling on the New Jersey Turnpike. And I loved it, but it was an old friend of mine who called and convinced me that we should try starting something new. And this was in the .com era.
Mm.
And you talk about opportunities and challenges and sort of the twists, right, that happen in a career. This was that moment for me.
So what did you start in the .com era? What was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my hope was that we could build a cool company together. Who's this?
This is
Hello.
Tucker. Tucker feels like it is necessary for him to at least be a partial guest on the
Hi,
show.
Tucker. Don't grill me too hard, okay? Um, my friend was from business, and I was from journalism, and we wanted to build a company that would help like assess and sort of organize information on the web, and provide some value for people. And we actually were early days of AI and machine learning. We were trying all
Mm.
these things. I will tell you that the biggest lesson I took away from it, because that company failed, we did not succeed.
Mhm.
But I learned two things. One, I was really, really interested in business. And two, I had a lot to learn.
Yeah.
But it got me on a new career path.
Uh-huh.
And that's when I went back to school at night and I started up as an intern at an investment company and just started to work my way up.
Yeah. Very interesting. See, those little curveballs, those failures. I think it's so hard for people to accept failure. I was
Mm.
interviewing a receptionist for one of my clients the day before yesterday, and I asked her who her favorite boss was. And she told me, but she said, and one of the reasons he was my favorite is because if I made a mistake, it was okay to fail. And he would
Yeah.
come and patiently teach me how to do it right and not admonish me for making mistakes. She worked in a hotel and she charged the guests $26,000 for their room bill. So so it was a
Yeah.
big mistake. They had just one mistake. But I think that's an important lesson that we can all learn that failure is a learning experience. And you go back and you go, okay, I didn't do it that well, so let me do it this way and tweak and make it a little bit better. But tell me how you got into veterinary medicine because that's another curveball.
Yeah, it was. I always say like I've had kind of three careers. I've had that journalism career, which I loved, but again, didn't love writing. There was a period of time where I went back to school and I was working for an investment firm in Philadelphia. And I was part of a team, and our mission was to help companies grow. And part of that meant investing in businesses. And we saw a lot of really cool businesses come through. And it was around 2007 or 2008 when we started to see these opportunities to invest in veterinary hospitals. And my friends and I, we knew next to nothing about veterinary medicine, but what we could tell was this was a mission-driven industry with a lot of really good people,
Mhm.
and it was profitable. And so
Mhm.
these were things that really got our attention. And so we ended up leaving the investment firm we worked at, and we decided to go and find some great partners in the industry to learn from. The first hospital that we partnered with was the Animal Hospital, Dauphin County. And that hospital is, if you've ever been to Pennsylvania, it's about a mile from Hershey Park. And I did spend a lot of time at Hershey Park getting chocolate and all that
It
because you
just
could get
smells
it.
so good
You
there.
could get it so cheap. Like Reese's Pieces, come on, let's be honest. Peanut butter cups are the best. What I would say is that it was a extremely eye-opening experience. And I knew I had so much to learn. And Dr. Bob Sarsfield, who's a friend and colleague to this day, he gave me the ability to kind of do that on his dime. So I would say that one of the hardest jobs I've ever done in my life is front desk.
Mhm.
Answering phones and trying to be helpful and supportive is almost impossible when you knew as little as I did. But I believed that that was the best way to learn and understand the business. And over the next 6 months and year, I helped our technicians in the back, I cleaned cages, and eventually was helping to practice manage the hospital with Bob. And I think it was an incredible experience. I value it so much, and it introduced me to the great people that work in this industry. And it also identified for me this very strange thing, which at the time, was relief, right? And so for us, when you needed help, when a doctor was going on vacation or you needed help with your practice, a lot of it back then was word of mouth.
Hmm.
And as a non-veterinarian, I sometimes I'm embarrassed to tell this story, but I think it's so important that people hear that, my hope was just that someone would show up.
Right.
Right? I didn't understand their professional credentials.
Mhm.
I didn't understand what kind of communication they were having in the exam room. I literally hoped that they just didn't smell weird and that they would do the job.
Yeah.
And when I look back upon that, right, it's with some reflection and some, understanding, but also a little regret, right? Because we were putting our patients and our clients in with people that we didn't fully credential and really understand. And
Mhm.
so for me, it identified this like real need to professionalize which at the time was a very kind of word of mouth, single practitioner type of thing, which was supporting hospitals with relief staffing.
Oh yeah. Well, as a manager, I had my Rolodex. And
Yes.
you go through and you try to find paper Rolodex, right? Go through and try to find relief doctors for somebody who is going on vacation or out for maternity leave, or you practice or everybody wanted to go to CE because they wait until the end of the year to get their CE and like, oh, I'm out of CE, I gotta go. And then to try to find somebody who you wanted in your practice to come
Yeah.
in. 'Cause you could maybe find the warm body, but they didn't practice the medicine to the level we were AHA accredited hospitals, or they didn't have the client communication that our clients were used to, or sometimes they were just plain lazy and they just would tell the team not to, unless something was dying, to not bring it in, that they didn't want to. And I've had them sit in one of my satellite hospitals and read a book half the day and do no work whatsoever, just placeholders in case something happened. So I really appreciate what you're talking about here. And I do want to say thank you for working the front desk and appreciating that position, because that's how I started in my career in veterinary medicine as a part-time CSR. And I worked the front desk as manager, like filling in for 19 years. And Dr. Jill Clark Rondabella and I just started an association for veterinary receptionists called NAVR, so that those folks would have the recognition that they deserve, because they get the heat. I mean, they're
It's a
beat
tough
up
job.
3 times as much as any other person in the hospital and have very little support for
Yeah.
their mental health, because they're the ones who are taking the brunt of whatever is going on.
Yeah.
For those clients, because they're easy to pick on. They're easy to pick on.
100%. Literally one of the toughest jobs I've ever done, but learned a lot.
Hmm.
And I think about that time, and for me, it was definitely sort of like this, like, wow, there's a lack of professionalism in that relief world. Like, how can we make it easier for hospitals to get great doctors, gold standard medicine, quality communication, people that they could trust? But the other thing that I saw up close and personal was just some of the challenges that the veterinarians on our team were kind of dealing with.
Hmm.
And, I think that these things are really well known today, but this was back in 2008, 2009. And I think the conversations around these issues were a little less out there.
Hmm.
Things like mental health challenges, they were real struggles with members of our teams, long days, euthanasias at all hours, and just kind of stress that would sort of really wear them down, long hours, lack of control of their schedule,
Hmm.
lack of leadership sort of paths, lack of career development opportunities.
Hmm.
And what quickly became clear to me, I developed a manifesto. I will admit, we wrote it down. And at the top of that list, and this was like lessons learned from a life of not being a veterinarian and working in veterinary animal health, is that for us, this started with being veterinarian led and bringing veterinarians into not only our company, but also our leadership team.
Hmm.
So my first partner, my co-founder is Dr. Andrew Heller, and he and I together started IndeVets.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because I feel like a lot of, especially with corporates taking over so many independent practices, the veterinarian's voice has been lost in that.
Yes.
And it is one of the reasons that some of those corporate businesses probably suffer more than they really need to, or that people get into them and think, this is not what I am here for. I am not here to worry about every penny that I can squeeze out of a client. I'm here to help animals. And we can't run by numbers. I know it's kind of crazy as a consultant who talks about management, but it's a people first business for me. It's get the people right, the money shows up. The people will take care of your clients will take care of your business. And why that is not obvious, I do not understand. It
Yeah.
is, yeah, data's great, but humans are what make or break your business, and you've got to take care of your people. So thank you for bringing a veterinarian into the discussion here.
Yeah.
So how, startups are tough. Tell me how you got started with IndeVet and got a little traction, because now you've got lots of traction. People know, I can remember seeing the booth for the first
Yeah.
time at VMX. I still
Yes.
remember it.
That was an exciting show. Um, Look, I mean, I think that there's always a story that founders, entrepreneurs tell about the perfect plan and executing on it. But, it is a mess of good and bad decisions, smart moves and bad ones. And I always sort of joke about this in the beginning, but it's like your business exists in the beginning because you decide that you're going to show up.
Mhm.
And that's like 90% of it. And you're figuring things out, you're making mistakes. One of the realities of our business and one of the biggest mistakes that I'm always proud to share is that our first ever shift, Dr. Heller, Andrew, he missed because I told him the wrong day. This was the first shift for our company. And I'll tell you, it never happens now because, well, almost never, because we have a great technology behind
Yeah,
it. But like Andrew went the wrong day. And I think that's just a great example
yeah,
of the reality of the world you live in
yeah,
when you're a startup. And we had to, I always remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this group will never work with us before again. And they ended up becoming one of our best clients, and they work with us to this very day.
yeah.
So
Well, it's
it's
how
hard in the
you
beginning.
recover. It's how you recover.
It's how you recover and you keep working at it. But I think the other thing that really kept us focused was a North Star for us, which was around making sure that we always thought about the needs of our veterinarians first, and made sure that we thought about that in the scope of what our hospitals need, right? There's that balance that needs to exist in
Yeah,
marketplace. And
yeah.
so for us, it was starting with clinical leadership at the top of the organization. We now have 16 veterinarians in our HQ team, and they are on our leadership team. They're on our recruiting team. They're part of the organization and they have a massive voice. I work for our doctors. That's my job. I want to make sure that they have the best experience possible and make sure that we're also delivering a lot of value for the partners that we work
Yeah.
with. But the next piece of that puzzle for us was mental health support. And I will say I have nothing against yoga and meditation. All those, I think they're great, but I also think that you have to put real effort into supporting your teams from that mental health position. And it's not just those slogans.
Hmm.
One of the big investments we made early on was bringing on a veterinarian social worker. This is someone who actually is was a licensed veterinary technician and has worked in this industry for a long time. And Dave has a number of tools in his tool chest and an entire burnout recovery program he puts our doctors through. And I just want to tell you one thing. It continues to amaze me about what's going on in our profession. When we assess every doctor that joins us, when they come on board, we give them a burnout survey. It's a clinical assessment. Dave does it. Dave Schuer, our veterinary social worker. I'm not going to quiz you on this, but I'm always amazed. 45% of doctors that join us have some level of burnout, which is just mind-boggling to me.
Hmm.
What I'm super proud of is that that number at 6 months after going through Dave's work, we can get it under 5%. And
Fantastic.
that to me is why we're doing this, because I think the industry needs to change and we want to be at the forefront of sort of just articulating how we think things can be. The more hospitals that we work with, the more doctors that join our mission, I think the broader we can send
Hmm.
that message.
Yeah, I want to go back to two things that you said. First of all, the North Star. And for years and years and years, I've talked about mission, vision, and values, and it's the foundation. And when I work with startups, we talk about where do you want to be? What is the reason that you do what you do, not from your head, but from your heart.
Yeah,
And I find that practices don't want to do the work because it's emotional and
it is. It's
it,
hard.
it gets too hard. It's too close. There's too much vulnerability in, well, the emotion behind it. Because some of them will say, well, I just wanted to practice better medicine than where I was. No, that's not good enough. That's not deep enough. We got to
Yeah.
keep digging into that. So when you talk about North Star, I think that is so important for people to understand. And obviously, you've used it and used it to flourish in your business. But the other component of that is using it to decision make. It's because you look at that and go, does that follow that? Because
Yeah.
I'm sure you had opportunities to vary off the path that people came in, offered you things and said, hey, how about doing this? Or let's change this to do this because it's cheaper and it's faster and it won't do, we don't have to spend this money. And then how do you say no, this is not the vision. This is not the what we're here for.
What a great question. I think people always underestimate how hard it is to do those things you're talking about and how valuable they are.
Mhm.
So for us, they've been a cornerstone of it. I would say that for us, being doctor driven, right, and that's one of our core values, gives us a lens when we're trying to make decisions. It's a key thought process for us by putting ourselves in our doctor's shoes and trying to understand them better. And for me, never being a veterinarian, but having worked in and I walked through 500 or 600 animal hospitals over the last 15 years. I have a sense of that, but for me, it's you got to be listening to the people you work with and the doctors on your team to be able to understand that. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's being willing to not only hire the people that represent those core values, but also willing to fire the people that don't. I think if you're not willing to make that bet on both sides, you're going to find yourself in some complicated
Yeah.
situations.
Oh gosh, 100%. We hang on to people who are pulling the rest of our team down because they have good skills.
Yes.
But it's amazing to me, instant change when you get that fly in the ointment out of your building, that
Yep.
it's almost like a veil lifts and everybody relaxes and takes a breath and then they start to work together. And over the years, I have said people will rather work shorthanded than work with somebody who is toxic or lazy or not pulling, their weight or pulling everybody down. And
Yeah.
and for a little while, you can, but not chronically shorthanded, but just for a day or two or a week or two, and until you can get, because they're so glad that they're gone.
I couldn't agree more. So one of our initial core value was no jerks.
Hmm.
Um, but someone very smart said to me, you really shouldn't have negative core values.
Yes.
And I thought that's fine. Let me change it. So one of our core values is highly competent and nice. And this was a direct set of experiences that I had working in animal hospitals where it seemed to me that a lot of the hospitals I went into, and I think you can relate because I think you just described the same thing. There were these super productive, highly skilled people who everyone was scared to death of, and no one wanted to talk to for fear of making them angry.
Yes.
And it crushed the cultures.
Hmm.
But everyone was really worried about making a change because they would lose that technical skill. So for us and all the doctors that join us, they have to be great doctors, and we can talk about it at some point. But we go through a really rigorous credentialing process for our doctors. And there's a lot that goes into the idea of great. You mentioned communication, quality medicine. There's a whole lot of really important things there. But they also have to be nice.
Yes.
And those two things, two sides to every coin. You can be really good at your job, but you also have to be good at the way you sort of
Hmm.
communicate. And so that's one
Hmm.
of our important core
Yeah, I
values.
love that. And I think sometimes we have people who are nice to clients and then trash the staff.
Just don't
But
understand
you
it.
have to be nice all the way through. In my book, Hospitality and Healthcare, I talk about you have your A-list clients, but you've got to treat all your staff as if they were your A-list clients in
Yeah.
order for you to maintain those A-list clients, because people do it. And sometimes we just are not kind to people and not giving grace to others and very judgmental. And it's up to leadership to step into that and go, this is not how we behave here, and to own it and say, if you are not willing to, behave the way we want you to, then you're not a good fit for us. And I don't know about you, but in job descriptions, there are a great deal of tasks listed in a job description. I add behavior into job description. I expect you to behave like this.
Love
And
that.
people look at me like, really? And I went, yes, I would rather describe how I want you to behave than how I want you to place a catheter in here. I want you to behave this way to the others in our world, to be interested in constantly learning and educating yourself, and to be willing to listen and to be willing to change and to be kind and give grace to other people. And that should be in every job description that we write in every business in the world, but it is not.
I love it. And, I say this all the time. I mean, animal hospitals, they're like small family businesses, even the ones that are owned by the big corporate groups. It's small groups of people, 20, 30 people, depending on the size of an animal hospital. And they're emotional places too. There's so much emotion and energy that goes into it. And so they're ripe for these kind of like really energized conversations. And so if you do have people that don't drive the culture you want, oh God, it can be really tough.
And that's going back to the mental health problem. So
Yes.
much of this is driven from that. Because if you're working in a place that you can't wait to get to work rather than wait to get the hell out of work, then chances are your mental health is going to thrive rather than suffer. And that comes from, again, from leadership. Are you giving people their breaks? Are you scheduling their lunches? Are you controlling your appointment book? Are
Yeah.
you listening to their needs and giving them autonomy? All those are things that I find in practices as a consultant that people think they can't control, and they absolutely can.
Yeah. They can.
But yeah, but they don't set the boundaries, and I'm not talking about boundaries that are so hard that you got something dying in front of you and you go, I'm sorry, at 6 o'clock I have to quit. That's not a reasonable boundary. But that 90% of the time you go home on time.
Right.
And almost 100% of the time you get something to eat at lunch, and 100% of the time you get to go to the bathroom when you need to. That's reasonable. That is a
Yeah.
reasonable work environment, and that
They
you work with
seem,
nice
yeah.
people who are kind. But
Seems pretty basic to me, Debbie.
yeah,
Seems pretty basic. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, we obviously work with a lot of different animal hospitals.
Mhm.
I think there's 10,000 or so in our partnership system right now. And there are amazing hospitals in there, and there are hospitals that our doctors don't want to go back to for the
Yeah.
very reasons you're describing. So I think like the world we live in, there's a variety. And part of the opportunity that comes from working with a group like IndeVets is that you get to have that choice and you get to have some control over that experience, and it does provide some autonomy. We also surround our doctors with what we call advocacy teams, and that's everything from our social worker I mentioned, Dave, to a clinical mentor and leader, to a support person for making sure you're in the best hospitals, working in the best environment. I mean, we also have a whole clinical collective where our doctors can share their stresses and their wins and their difficult cases, get feedback and support. I love lurking in there. I'm not a veterinarian, but I love it because what I see is this is a culture that supports and wants their colleagues to do well. And so when one of our doctors posts a question, it's a lot of, you got this, and I totally agree, and you're doing a great job. And sometimes that's all you need
A little
to
cheerleader.
do the day.
Yeah,
Goes a long way.
it does. It really does. It's, as I said earlier, it is sometimes a life or death decision making thing, and to have colleagues, especially when you're working solo practitioner, to have a colleague that you can call and say, "Hey, let me run this case by you."
Yes.
Personally, I've always managed hospitals that were two, three, five, 11 doctors, but there was collaboration between all the doctors, and nobody had, the ego that said, "Oh, I'm too good to talk to you because I'm a specialist." They were very collaborative in their casework, and I think that's one of the reasons that the hospitals were successful. And I would even say to the clients, "Look, you have a great advantage here. Our doctors talk to each other, so you don't just get one doctor to look at your pet. You have five who are going to talk about your case if it's complicated." And they went, "Yeah,
Love
that's
that.
really a good idea." So I love the fact that you have your kind of internal mentorship program and the collaborative and the mastermind that's going on. I'm sure that you are probably not having a problem finding staff to work for you.
Well, I would say in today's world, I think that there are doctors that are really, really enamored and driven by the same mission that we have. I don't always see this as like one choice or the other. I think one of the values of working for a company like IndeVets is that you get to make choices about your lifestyle, your career, and how you want to kind of live your existence. One of the biggest opportunities and advantages of being an indie vet is you get to make choices about when you work, right? Like just having some control. I think you mentioned it before, getting out on time, having a lunch break, being able to take some time when you need it. Those things are like, I think, really important in such a challenging profession like we have today. And so we've been really blessed, I think, by building a team of doctors. I think we are around 250 doctors today from that one, Dr. Heller, back in 2018. So we've come a long way,
That's
but
growing fast. Yeah.
we work really hard to make sure that they have what they need. And like I said, my job is to work for our doctors.
So looking back on that, what do you, other than not having Dr. Heller show up when he was supposed to, what do you consider to be your biggest career mistake? And looking back from journalism on through.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is believing that I knew more than I did. And I think it's such an easy mistake to make, sort of overconfidence. I think the older I've gotten, the more humble pie I've had to sort of absorb. And I think that's right. It's really easy to sort of like believe that you have the answers. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud of, particularly with the team that we have here, is that I'm fortunate to be surrounded by people who know a lot more than me. And I feel like I learn from them every day. So I think part of it is just being willing to hear that. I think as an entrepreneur, sometimes, maybe even a veterinarian like has some of the same challenges. You're expected or you believe that you should be expected to have the answers. And I think that's such an easy trap to fall into. And so for me, letting go of that and being willing to hear those other ideas has been a real lesson for me.
Yeah, I do relate to that. As the consultant, I'm the guru, right? I'm supposed to know all the stuff.
Exactly.
And I laugh and said, at 20, I knew everything. And now I realize how much I don't know about
That's
things.
right.
But like you, I keep a network of experts in other areas. And I'll say to my clients, you know what? I am not qualified to speak deeply about that subject. I had this conversation this morning about 401ks. I said, but I know people and that are experts in that field. So let me connect you with them and then you take their expertise. So that I think is extremely important. Um, I feel like we kind of think along the same path about most of this stuff, and it's great.
Yeah,
So
agree.
speaking of networking, I mean, obviously it was connections and connections, connections that helped you, even get along your career path. But what other value do you find in networking? Because a lot of people look at it like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to talk to other people. I don't want to, put myself out and be uncomfortable and ask for a connection with someone. But can you talk to me about what value you find in that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I'll be a little vulnerable with you, and I'll share a reality about me. Even though I'm the founder and CEO of the company, I definitely feel more introvert than extrovert, right? And so being out there and making those connections, reaching out and being willing to sort of like put yourself out there, it takes some effort for me, right? It's not necessarily the first thing I wake up and do. But what I've found, and I think it's just like the nice surprise you get in life, is like more times than not, those conversations teach me something I didn't know, make an introduction for me in a way that I didn't realize I needed. And I'm always surprised by sort of the joy I get from it once I get over the hump
Yeah.
of actually doing the work to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That first
I
little
think
scary part of it.
Yeah, and I think this profession, this industry is full of people who really, really want to help.
Mhm.
I've rarely run into folks here who are unwilling to sort of listen and support, and I think that's just a great thing about veterinary medicine.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of the nicest people on earth migrate to veterinary medicine. I've had industry sales reps who have come over from the human side. We call that the dark side, by the way, and coming into veterinary medicine and go, everybody is just so appreciative and so nice. I said, yeah, if you feed us, we're always really glad to anything, And please don't feed us donuts and pizza all the time. Bring something healthy. And I we used to fuss at my sales rep, don't you bring that mess in my hospital. We're going to feed these people something decent so they can
I
have
love it.
fuel and not garbage in their systems when they go, oh, but it's harder to do that than bring a pizza.
It's tough. I mean, pizzas or like little Dunkin' Donuts, that's also
Yeah.
pretty good. What's your go-to to feed the staff? What do you think?
I
Good.
always like Panera was always good because they have good
Panera's
healthy
good.
stuff. And then even if they just wanted to go to the grocery store and get fruit and veggie trays and bring cheese and things like that, then they weren't fried, they weren't greasy, they were nutritious and they were easy to pick up and people just loved it when that kind of stuff came in.
I don't know about you, but if I see any chocolate within reaching distance, it's in my mouth.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I'm so weak. So
Absolutely.
my thing is like, just don't show it to me, please.
Right. Don't bring me that stuff.
Just please put it somewhere else.
Well, I used to laugh and tell people when I hired them at the animal hospital, I said, look, the first thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to gain 10 pounds because my practice owner would give my groomer $100 and say every Monday stop at Krispy Kreme when they are cooking donuts and bring 2 dozen donuts into the practice. Now, fortunately for me, I don't like donuts, so it didn't bother me, but everybody got donuts. But then our clients were constantly bringing us
Always, yeah.
cakes and food and popcorn and things in appreciation, which is wonderful. However, it is fattening and not particularly healthy. And then there was the sales reps who would bring stuff too. But I feel like that's another part of being responsible manager is to look after the health of your team, whether it's, giving them an ergonomic chair or setting the counters at the right height or bringing in food that's nutritious and making sure that they are fed healthy things in your meetings and in breaks and keeping things like that available to them. Thinking back, I mean, obviously IndeVets has been very successful in what I would consider in a business short period of time. Now, I feel like there was, the gods were with you. There was a lot of things happening with COVID and
Yes.
people not being able to work and then people not wanting to go back to work full time. And they figured out, it was really kind of nice to be at home. They didn't really have to do it. I'm one of them. I was on the road every other week up until 2018. 2019 was my last trip out before the world shut down. And it is amazing what we found out we could do virtually. So, what advice would you give? I mean, there's a lot of startups out there in vet med now, and some very creative ones, and some ideas that go, wow, that's really pretty slick. If that works, that's going to work really well for us. But what advice would you give somebody starting up and looking at, the success that you guys have had?
Gosh, that's a great question. I First of all, I think it's really important to be clear on what your mission is. I think if you wake up every day and you know what you're trying to accomplish, it makes things a lot easier. Surround yourself with people who know more than you, create that space for other people to sort of support you. And I think that the other piece of it is, and I think you said it well, having the wind behind your back is easier than the wind in front of you. And if it's a growing market and a growing industry and there's opportunity, that's a much better time to make an investment in a leap than when the winds are blowing in the other direction.
Hmm.
But in the end, like it's there, I wish that there were sort of some secret sauces. Some days I wake up and I feel like I've got it all figured out. And some days I wake up and I can't believe how little I know. And I think that's the joy of starting a business.
That is so true. That is so true. I started my consulting business in 2007, 2008, right in the middle of a recession. And you would think,
Oh
oh, have you
gosh.
lost your mind? But if you
Right.
think about it, there was probably no greater time that veterinary hospitals needed help than
Yeah, true.
than growing and maintaining their business than during a time when the economy was bad and they were struggling to try to figure out how to stay in business. So it actually worked to my benefit. And in every economy, there's people who win and people who lose. And if you think about, even in COVID, obviously there were a lot of people like the restaurant businesses and in entertainment industry that suffered, but there were people who flourished. And you're thinking about medical supplies and Netflix and digital services that provided, I mean, look at Zoom. Zoom was just like a little
Yeah.
afterthought for most people. And now it is,
Peloton,
how
all
could we
that.
live without Zoom?
We need it.
Yeah.
Well, Joey, let me ask you a question because I think it's such an interesting time for veterinary medicine. I mean, the trends on exam visits year
Hmm.
over year, right?
Hmm.
They're negative. And you've been in this business longer than me, but I've been in it for almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago, I went back and I looked at the industry and I said, well, how has it grown? And I went back to the year I was born, 1971, and it had grown every year
Yeah.
since I was born.
Hmm.
And this year, I think the industry is still going to grow, but it's going to be really small if it does. Those exam visits are down. What do you think? What's your take on what's going on?
I think that we're probably in a little reshuffling. I feel like some of the things that we relied on and were a strong source of income for us have been pulled away
Hmm.
from the traditional hospital. If you think about, there are telehealth companies that are satisfying that urgent
Sure.
call that came in over the front desk going, my cat's not doing this, or the food,
Mm.
and then
Yep.
the medications with
Yep.
Chewy and all the things that they sell. So that's pulling some of our trips away from us because people used to come in and pick those things up and say, and I know you work the front desk, so you know this, they go, I'm here to get some food, but my cat's been doing this thing, right?
Yes.
And you go, oh, you need to book an appointment because that's not right. And we would pick up visits that way. Now, if my cat's not doing something that is normal, I'm going to Google search it and
Yep.
not call the animal hospital. And maybe I find satisfaction there. Maybe I'm not, it really didn't need to come in because there's a lot of times you answer the phone and you go, it's really fine. It's normal.
Yeah.
We've all had to try to talk through people who are trying to remove their dog's nipples because it's a male dog and they think it's a tick. So we know those things happen and normal behaviors. One of the cutest ones that happened the other day was the client got a new kitten and she never had a cat before. And she called the hospital in a panic, thinking it had an upper respiratory problem. And the technician said, hey, can you video that kitten? Because we just checked it out and it's fine. And it was purring. She did not know. It was just
Uh,
happy and purring. This is a good thing. So, those kind of calls, and we talked a little bit earlier about how people hate to talk on the phone. So those kind of calls aren't coming in as much, which always led to appointments. Other things that are pulling things away from us now are companies that are starting to sell at-home lab tests and
yeah.
going to pull some things away. So I feel like the medicine is just doing a little reshuffle. And what I think we may end up looking at, and I don't want to look at it, human medicine as an example because I think human medicine is a hot mess. When I had somebody the other day tell me that a general practitioner, if you look at their numbers and what they're supposed to see 60 patients a day.
Wow.
That's 7.5 minutes
Incredible.
per patient.
Yeah.
What kind of care are you giving anybody
Not
if
good.
you're running people through that way? And yes, they're, utilizing their support staff, but I'm sorry, that's not right. It's just not right. And that's a numbers driven process. That's not a human driven process.
Yeah.
So when we look at vet med and we see that we went through a little period, I think, where young veterinarians were afraid to own a hospital. They didn't
Hmm.
want the burden of owning a hospital, and that's absolutely fine. But what they didn't understand was if you own a hospital and you do it right, you don't work 70-hour weeks. You have people like relief vets who can come in and give you a break. You can organize your life and you can set it up so that it runs itself if you do it right. The last year before my practice owner retired, he moved to Florida from North Carolina,
Yeah.
established residency for 6 months in Florida so that when he sold his practice to our associate, he didn't have to pay state income tax on the money.
Amazing.
So your hospital will run without you if you do it right.
Yep.
And I try to teach people how to do it right so that it's not a burden and it's a joy. But we're seeing a little more of that entrepreneurship start
Come
again.
back again.
Are
Yeah.
getting excited about owning independent practices. I think some of the corporates that were really hardline dollar driven are losing. Obviously, some of them we've had a lot shut down completely, and I've personally have seen them ruin a couple of good practices by running the staff off, being too numbers driven.
Yeah.
And so, those people are coming out and going, oh, I think maybe I've had my kids, maybe I've done relief for a while. And here's the other thing about relief that I think is fascinating is they'll go out and they'll do relief and they'll see good systems in place and good people in place. And they then get the confidence to say, well, you know what? I can run a hospital. I can do this. And I'm going to take all the great stuff that I learned from
Yeah.
being out in the world and I'm going to start my own hospital and be an entrepreneur. So it's an interesting time, but I feel like I've been teaching communication, client service, emotional intelligence, all those things for 20 years in
Yeah.
animal health. I laugh and say, people say, what do you do for a living? I said, I teach animal people how to successfully talk to humans. That's my job. And now it's like this light bulb came on and went, we really need to do that. We
Yeah.
really need to serve the public. We need to be over the top with communication and customer service because if we do that, we build trust relationships with our clients, and they may go to Dr. Google, but they still trust us more, and we will still be able to grow. Got to build those relationships, and we've got to understand our customer and be where they want us to be. That's the other part is how do you satisfy your customer where they want you? Do we have the ability to online book appointments? Because that young generation, that's what they want. That's what I want. I've never called an airline agent in 30 years. I want to do it online. Same thing for hotels. We need to look at outside of our industry and see what great things are out there that we enjoy and pull them into our industry and be proactive in satisfying our client. I feel like there's always a place for veterinarians. I feel like, there's and not just disaster medicine, but if we position ourselves correctly as we are the collaborator with our clients in
Yeah.
helping their pets live great lives, then we will always be there and there will be success for us. I'm sure you're familiar with the book Story Brand.
By name. Yeah. I haven't read it
Well,
though.
I would suggest that everybody reads Story Brand because in every story there is always, if you think about a novel, poetry, movie, there is always the hero, there is always the dilemma, there is always the character who is the wise counselor, and then there is the story that takes us through the dilemma to satisfaction, and at the end there's a happy ending. And when I ask veterinary teams, who in your practice is the hero of the story? They always will say, well, it's probably the veterinarian. And I go, it's never the veterinarian. It is always the client, and the dilemma is the pet, and you are the wise counselor.
Yeah.
And when you look at being that counselor, being the collaborator, being the one who is the guide and the educator, it changes how you feel about working with your client. And the client feels a collaborative partnership with you, and they don't want to go to other sources. So it's a long-winded answer to that question that you asked, but that's what I believe.
Yeah, no, there's a lot there, and I think that story and thinking about yourself as a colleague, I think, is really, really valuable. I
Mhm.
think veterinarians, what's great about this industry is it's really hard to outsource it to China. This is something that you have to kind of do. You have to put hands on,
You have to put
right?
hands on. Mhm.
And no matter how much telemedicine there is or Google in the end, right? People want that experience because they know that's the only way to get the
Yeah.
best care.
Yes.
So I'm excited about the future of veterinary medicine and our role in it. I think there's room for everyone.
Mhm.
And I'm excited about creating some new ways for doctors to work. You mentioned vacations and sort of coverage, but a lot of our hospitals were just long-term extensions of their teams. Our doctors go to the summer barbecue, and are invited out for pizza after. We have doctors that have been working at the same partner hospital since 2018, if you
Mhm.
can believe it. They're
Mhm.
just they're just managed great by our amazing team, and they bring such value and experience to those local hospitals. It's been really a pleasure to kind of
Yeah.
see it come to life.
Well, I think relief veterinarians done well have such a great place in entrepreneurs' life and in practice growth because there comes a time when you're kind of on the cusp of do I need
Yes.
another full-time veterinarian? Can I prove it? Can I grow my business to where I can put somebody on salary? And putting relief into the gap is a great opportunity to see, can I grow it? Do we have the team for it? What do I need to do to accommodate another doctor in the mix, especially if you're the one doctor there? Because the more doctors you have, the more complicated things become, as I'm sure you realize. Everybody has their own way of doing things. So how do we adjust and manage that? And I feel like relief veterinarians are such a good way to test drive it without having the commitment of a contracted worker. And maybe they don't work out, or maybe you don't have the business yet, but they're there to help you
Yeah.
grow.
Couldn't agree more. It's a great way to sort of test growth and to do it in a way that's flexible and responsive to your needs. I think you're spot on.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, we have taken all the time with it. Well, you agreed to give to us, so thank you very much. But I'd love to ask people if they have a fun fact that they'd like to share. So, other than not being willing to write as a journalist,
Yeah.
do you have any other fun facts or talents that people might be surprised to know?
I wish I did. I will tell you something I'm not good at. Maybe that's a good way to end this conversation. But my girlfriend, her family lives in Lancaster, PA, and they invited almost 50 people to their farm for line dancing. And I will tell you that I had every intention in the world for that to be just an incredible, fun experience. And I was absolutely disastrous, but I had the best time in the world. So I will just tell you that a fun fact about me is I cannot line
You
dance.
cannot line dance.
That
So,
video will never be seen by the public.
yes. So, now that we put this out here into the world, the next IndeVet event will be sure to have line dancing instruction as part of the
Oh,
team growth
man,
event.
Gabby, you're killing me, and you're probably not wrong.
As a manager, I would have had to do that if I found out that my practice owner did not want to do that. Either that or sing karaoke. One of those two things would have had to happen. Okay.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Michael, and getting to know you a little bit and a little more about IndeVets. And think the story is a great story, and I appreciate the value that you're bringing to VetMed and helping us with our bends in the road and our curveballs that hit us, and being able to help veterinarians have the life they want to live and stay in their profession, because we need them to stay. You need them to stay.
Gabby, I loved it. It was a pleasure getting to know you a little bit today. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. And so thank you to the audience for listening to this episode of The Bend. We will put Michael's information and IndeVet's information in the show notes so that you can reach out if you and when you, because you're going to need a relief vet at some point in time. Thank you again for listening to The Bend.